Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall, and let's talk about IPA, hops, research and development, and the overall evolution of beer with Sam Tierney. He's the brewing manager of the Propagator, the small brewing project in Los Angeles from Firestone Walker. From how beers go through trials to hop experimentation, we're going to cover it all. We're going to get into the show in just a moment, but first, Jack Hendler of Jack's Abbey is joining me on the line, and the brewery is a sponsor of this episode, and we're thankful for that. And again, we're talking about the brewery's Lagers of the World series, and the 5th version has just been released, and this time the brewery is headed to Iceland. So, Jack, can you tell us a little bit about this collaboration and just what goes into a Jóla Bock?
Absolutely. So this is a really exciting collaboration that we did with an Icelandic brewery, and we're learning all about Iceland and what it takes to brew beer in that country, which has all kinds of challenges, as you might expect, being a small island nation in the middle of the Atlantic.
So access to ingredients, I imagine, being one?
Absolutely. Access to ingredients, although the one ingredient that was talked about a lot was their water, and that was a really interesting tidbit that we learned about. They have some fantastic volcanic water that they get to use to make their beers. What does that contribute to the recipes, to the beers? The water that they're using comes from volcanic sources. So, you can get Icelandic water here in the U.S., I believe under the Icelandic brand, but it has an interesting mineral content, but is a very soft water. All right. So tell us about Jóla Bock and what it is we can expect to taste when we open up our cans and pour it into a glass. So when we talked to Einstök about what they brew and how they brew, one of the interesting things was about their holiday beer. And we were really inspired by this style of beer, this Jóla Bock, and Jóla is their holiday inspired beer. And we were able to incorporate that sort of flavor characteristic that they're looking for the middle of the winter. And as you can expect, that's a little bit of a stronger beer, a little bit of a darker beer. So this is a deep amber, malty, on the sweeter side Bock beer. Well, thanks, Jack. You're going to be back with us at the bottom of the show to talk more about this very cool collaboration. But in the meantime, I'm going to encourage everybody to visit jacksabbey.com to learn more about this beer as well as the brewery. I'm excited to have Sam Tierney on the show this week. He's been running Firestone Walker's Propagator in Los Angeles for the 6 years it's been open and has unique insight on creating small batches that could one day be scaled, experimenting with ingredients, and finding the sweet spot for drinkers. He's a passionate brewer who takes the role seriously and is constantly trying to find ways to improve upon techniques and processes. As the brewery location nears another anniversary, he reflects on how hops have evolved in beer and what it takes to stay fresh, but not lose sight of history and tradition. He spoke to me from California. Here's our conversation. The Propagator has been around for 6 years now, right?
Opened spring 2016, and we brewed our first batch in November of 2016.
What was that first batch?
The first batch was Wookie Jack. And that was kind of, that was our black rye IPA that we had just discontinued the year before. And, we're looking to keep it around in some capacity. And that was a good new recipe to work out on the small brew house because, it's a little forgiving versus saying, we wanted to knock out a Pilsner or something like that, big beer with some dark malt and a lot of dry hop. So we were able to kind of work things out. And that first recipe definitely didn't hit all the numbers perfectly, but we learned a lot from it and were able to pretty quickly dial in the brew house.
As you think about the last 6 years, because it's interesting that you did a black rye IPA, right? And I miss Wookie Jack. Like it was a really fun beer to drink. And the whole idea of black IPA or Cascadian Dark or whatever a brewery is calling that, a lot of those styles that people enjoyed got knocked out of the water by the hazies, by the New England styles. And it seems like 6 years ago that change really started to take hold in earnest, where the very nature of IPA in the US started to change. I don't know if you agree with that or not. That's sort of my where I've been sitting, what I've been seeing. But I'm wondering how you've seen IPA change in the 6 years that the Propagator's been open.
I think I do definitely agree with that analysis and essentially that timeline. So the second beer that we brewed here was Gen 1 IPA, and that's a beer that we still make pretty regularly, probably every other month about. And it's, we called it a West Side IPA since we're on the west side of LA. And we weren't really sure. It wasn't really in the classic West Coast model at the time. It's unfiltered, so it's a little hazy. It's brewed with some wheat, and it at the time in 2016, we were starting to really become aware of trends toward, hazier IPAs, juicier IPAs. And that was really starting to take off. Obviously, I think at that point, we'd already had the Alchemist come out. I forget exactly the year they came out for the Invitational. And I think, we had all, obviously had a lot of those beers from New England at the time. And we're thinking about, the evolution of West Coast IPA. And so Gen 1 was kind of our first take on that, where it was, as modern as we could make it. And, a little hazy, definitely had a big, Citra mosaic, dry hop. Bitterness was not very in your face. And so, we still make that beer today. It's, we've tweaked it a little bit. I've certainly increased the hop dosage in it over the years. It started out pretty modest, like any, normal IPA we would have brewed back then. But, as hopping rates have increased a lot in the subsequent years. So we modernized it a bit, but it's really not that different. So it's kind of like a halfway, almost like a hybrid style IPA, where it's definitely, brewers that make what we now call like, West Coast IPA here, which was just IPA.
Right.
That they'll look at it and say, oh, well, it's kind of hazy and it's not very bitter. But, compared to the newer, juicier IPAs that have, subsequently come to dominate. Not completely dominate here, but, they're definitely a huge part of the IPA game. It's definitely not like that either. So that was definitely our first step in that direction. Or at least that year we were trying out a bunch of new stuff like that.
Out here on the East Coast, I feel like it's harder to find a well-made West Coast traditional IPA than it was even 6 years ago, just because the marketplace is dictating haze. When you're saying that haze isn't dominating out there, do you have like a rough idea of, or in your mind at least, what that split might be?
I'm not sure market overall. I do think that,
or even anecdotally, but yeah.
Well, yeah, well, sure. I know from, looking, we're big enough that we definitely are very aware of, stuff like IRI data. And so, if you look at the overall larger market here, I think that what we would call West Coast IPAs are still dominating sales, whether it's Lagunitas IPA, or, for us, we still have a couple West Coast IPAs that do pretty well, even though actually now our largest selling IPA is Mine Haze, which is kind of New England influenced hazy IPA. So there's definitely that. And I think on a smaller kind of like hype brewery level, as far as what's driving the interest, what's driving the beer geek stuff, it seems like hazy did overtake West Coast for a bit, but I think things have kind of balanced out and it seems relatively equal to me. And I think that a lot of the hardcore craft drinkers that, are really committed to, and loyal to a lot of the established breweries here tend to gravitate a little bit more toward West Coast, but I think it's fairly even, actually. I think we've kind of gotten to that point where it's a good mix. Like, it's hard to go to any brewery here really, and not find a West Coast IPA, which I know is definitely not the case in other regions.
Yeah.
But you'll usually find, there, except for a few holdouts, pretty much everyone who really makes IPA a core part of their business, which is almost every brewery is doing both essentially.
When you think back to year one and finding hopping rates that you felt comfortable with, there's something that stuck out of my mind of remembering talking to brewers 20 years ago or 25 years ago, where they were talking about recipes to German brewers or Belgian brewers and talking about, pounds per barrel, or, not necessarily in the way that it is today, but how old world brewers were astonished, maybe even a little mortified by the amount of hops that were going into some US beers. And then sort of hearing more established US brewers that are now going into the hazy New England style, where however many pounds per barrel you could get in, that was a ridiculous number, struck some more established US brewers as, just a little crazy. When you were thinking about those recipes and trying to get out of that initial comfort zone, did you all have to psych yourself up for it? Was it, what was going through your mind when you started making these beers?
Yeah, I definitely think there had to be some sort of mental recalibration. When we first started testing out for Mind Haze, so that would have been 2018. And then Mind Haze, we did our full market launch in the beginning of 2019. So basically, early kind of spring into summer of 2018, we started brewing hazy IPAs here at the Propagator. And we were just, we kind of were trying everything. But we knew just from talking to other brewers that were already doing it that, we were going to have to definitely do a heavier hop approach than we were used to, but at the same time minimizing bitterness. So most of that's happening in the dry hop, and that's we did go pretty heavy in the whirlpool initially, and then we've kind of scaled back on that subsequently. But yeah, I think some of our earlier beers, we did some really heavily hopped IPAs. Double Jack was always fairly heavily hopped as a classic, West Coast double IPA. But our thinking was, okay, well, you need a really big beer to handle that kind of hop load, and and you're also going for much higher bitterness in a beer like that. So the overall hop in something like that is comparable to something like Mind Haze or a lot of the hazy IPAs we brew here. We do a lot of other one-off stuff too, but the way we're using the hops are a little different. So, most of that's going into the dry hop now on the hazy IPAs, where Double Jack was getting a lot more in the brew house, including hop extracts to get that bitterness. So yeah, doing lighter beers, we always thought that there was this maximum threshold in which, diminishing returns took over and there was just really no point. And in a West Coast style beer, in a clear beer, I definitely still believe that you do get a point where you're not really getting anything out of it. And, things change a little bit with how we approach the hazier beers, with the different yeast strain we use and the different grain bill approach we're using. You are creating this matrix of compounds in the beer, and you're carrying more of those compounds into the finished beer. And that's part of what gives you that juiciness, that roundness, that unique flavor profile you get out of those beers that you can't really achieve in a West Coast IPA. And because of that, you can increase the hops. And if you're doing it, correctly, you're not going to add too many grassy, astringent burn-like character, So I think in a West Coast IPA, yeah, definitely you can get to this over hop period where you're not really getting anything out of it. And then you do start to get more green, chlorophyll-y, grassy notes. But in a hazy, if you do it right, you can get to a higher level, I think, and still get more out of it and still get a return for your investment there.
Can we talk about doing it right? Because for those hazy beers, because I'm thinking of, and I imagine it's a little different at Propagator, but if we're talking about Mind Haze and coming out of Paso, that's a pretty big system. And when I'm visiting, smaller 7-10 barrel brew houses, and they're saying, okay, well, we're doing, 5 pounds per barrel. That seems excessive. I mean, it works for them. You guys can't do that. I imagine, for, going up to 10 pounds per barrel for some of your systems, right?
No, yeah,
okay?
I don't think, I think even here at the Propagator, I've topped out maybe around 6.
Which some people are going to say, oh, that's too low, which is also ridiculous. But so how do you do it right to extract those aromas and flavors without, one, bankrupting your hop budget, overwhelming your system, or just, I don't know, playing into ridiculousness?
Yeah, I think hop selection.
I feel like that sounds like a loaded question, where it probably is, but I didn't mean it that way.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think it's optimizing the hop varietal usage with our yeast strain, and, really getting the flavors we want. And then, dry hopping. I think a lot of it comes down to raw material selection too. If you are really careful about the hops that you're picking, and, you have the best quality coming in, you're going to get more out of it. You're not going to get things that you don't want if you're selecting away from that in the raw material phase. And to me, that's where a lot of, overly hopped beers can go wrong, is if you're starting with hops that aren't of the correct quality for the flavor you're looking for. It doesn't matter, adding more hops is actually going to be a detriment, because then you're going to start to get more character that you didn't want potentially. So there's that. And then, yeah, I also think on the larger scale, you have some advantages as far as extraction. I think you tend to get more out of dry hops in larger tanks, just because you have a lot more beer to fall through as hops settle. So you're not going to get hop settling prematurely, and then you can do things like rousing tanks to make sure you're fully extracting your hops as well. And that's definitely something that we've experimented a lot with, and we do on most of our dry hop beers. And then I think there's that approach. And then also, having a centrifuge, which a lot of smaller breweries do as well, but we found that having the centrifuge, allows you to clean up the beer, so you're not leaving too much in, and I think, the biggest detriment that I still see in hazy IPAs that are otherwise well made is just that hop burn, that too much green, astringent character that, that gives you that prickly burning sensation in the finish, which, some drinkers gravitate toward a little bit of that. And I think that we've found that, we've chosen to fully move away from that and basically fully mitigate that, so that our beers are, more drinkable and tend to, just have a much rounder, cleaner finish. And I think, and centrifuging is key to that.
Can we go back to selection for a second? Because I know not every brewer that's listening has had the chance to do it in the way that you all do it, and certainly the non-beer makers that are listening might be fascinated by this. But and let's just, whatever hop you want to talk about, we don't have to talk about all of them, but just if there's one sort of in mind, when you go to selection, how do you approach what you hope to leave with? And is there a good varietal to talk about with that?
Yeah, you can go classic and think about, looking at something like Cascade or Centennial or Chinook, hops that we've used basically since the beginning. And, those have always been grown by a lot of different growers in different regions, so, we like to look at, some hops from Oregon, some hops from Washington, and then, increasingly Idaho as well. And, but also you have to be open too, because I think, there definitely is a terroir element that plays into the character of those hops, but there's also a lot of variation in microclimates, even in the Yakima Valley. And you're going to get, very different lots of a given variety from different farms. And so, depending on the specific weather, the growing conditions of that year, different farms come up with different qualities in their hops, and everyone's trying to just grow the best hops, but that's just kind of the way it works out. So we definitely feel like, there's farms that we select hops from, year after year, but a lot of times, we like to just see what what the companies that we're working with and buying the hops from, because we do buy some hops direct, but most of the hops we buy are coming from, the brokers that we work with. And they kind of know what we're into, and they do a lot of analysis these days. So, they're looking at oil profiles already, and they can kind of steer us toward a selection, put everything on the table from, the farms that we usually like. And then, you just have to be open to finding the quality you're looking for. And I think that, developing a team over the years that's now kind of on the same page as far as like, okay, what are we steering away from? What kind of character are we queuing in on with each given variety? What do we want out of that hop, and what's that hop going to do for us? And so you kind of have a goal for every variety that you're going to select. And that's best case scenario is you have, different hops, all of high quality that are all a little bit different. And then you can pick the one that kind of perfectly fits your flavor profile. But there's also the reality that in any given year, there can be challenges and, something like just, heat waves or high winds or fires and smoke. And so you're also looking to make sure that you're not selecting lots that are going to display off flavors that may come from that. And that's really tricky, but part of it is just doing that. And then, and every lot too, as it gets processed in the farm, it gets dried, it gets baled. There's other opportunities for things to happen that kind of steer the character in one way or another. So, part of it is also just making sure that you're getting the best quality too. And sometimes there's just like the objectively best lot on the table that was handled the best, grown the best, dried the best. And it just, it gets you everything you want.
You're a member of the Hop Quality Group, right?
Yes.
Which we've talked about on the show before. Is there anything that you can talk about initiatives that you all are trying to get more brewers or drinkers to be thinking about?
Well, yeah. It's over the years.
I know that was an open-ended question because I'm springing that one on you, but
yeah. Firestone Walker was one of the founding breweries for the Hop Quality Group. And, over the years, the group has done a lot of work, a lot of outreach to farms, and it all started as this kind of realization that we needed better relationships and better connections with the farmers that grow our hops. And it kind of came about after the Anheuser-Busch sale initially to turn into AB InBev. And they kind of changed some of their program as far as how they were doing their relationships with the raw material suppliers. And Val Peacock, who had worked with them, had retired, and they got him on board. And he had so much experience, visiting farms, all over the world, everyone that was growing hops for AB, and basically said, hey, if we want to, form better relationships with craft brewers directly and talk about quality and talk about what's important for us, what's the best way to go about that? So they started that up, and then we started going and visiting farms every year. And this is something I've been doing since probably about 2015. And, different members get together, we'll organize a few trips every year and then go visit farms. And, at this point, everybody kind of knows the program, and it's really about just, connecting with people and just letting everyone know that, we really care, and, we want to see the best quality. And so, basically giving expectations about what we expect as far as food safety and cleanliness, that was a big one. It's as craft has come to dominate the hop industry in some ways. Not completely, obviously the alpha market still drives international hops, but we're using so many hops now, and the way we use them is so different. So dry hopping has become dominant, and because we add our hops post fermentation and we're not boiling them, we have to be very careful about the quality and make sure sure, quality, not just from an aromatic standpoint, but quality from a food safety standpoint, making sure that the facilities are clean and that, there's not birds pooping on the hops as they're being dried. And
it's important.
There's not contamination. There's not, cell phones and broken glass in the bales of hops from lights that are shattering, things like that. So there's all kinds of things, so there's this kind of big checklist you kind of have to go through and say, okay, here's what we want. And then, and thankfully, the farmers over the years have all responded really well, and they've all wanted to step up their game, and I think have realized that if they can prove to us that they're taking all the extra lengths to give us the quality that we're looking for, that we'll pay for it. And and the price of hops has gone up, so it's and we know we're asking for more, so we're gonna have to pay more for it. But I think that over the years it's been a really great program, and I think as something that started as a small amount of brewers doing it, we have grown and expanded membership recently, but I think the craft world has really benefited a lot from that work over the years.
I can understand light bulbs breaking. I'm a little more confused about cell phones getting into hops. Was this just like party nights that got out of control, or?
You should see, so we would go and do these farm visits with different staff members from different companies, like Hops Diner, Yakima Chief, Haas, mostly, and and they do their own audits too. So they're the main buyers from the farms that are then selling to brewers. So they have their own internal quality programs, and so and forming the relationships with them. And so we all kind of made this like kind of a partnership and said, hey, we're not going to try to work around you. We buy the hops from you. So, our relationships are paramount as well. We never wanted to make any appearances like we were trying to go around them and go directly to the farmers, because that all those relationships are really important. And so we all worked together on this, and yeah, they would show us pictures, they'd say, hey, here's the like photo book of all the crazy things we found in bales when they show up to the pellet plants. And it's like, like a rake broken in half, cell phones, hats, all manners of clothing, wedding rings, watches, so it was like people working in the facilities just dropping things on a conveyor somewhere. And then, if you've been into a hop picker while it's running during harvest, it's the most chaotic environment. There's just all of these belts and conveyors going everywhere, the pickers stripping the hops off the bines. And so all it takes is, if somebody checking Facebook on their phone, accidentally drops in a conveyor, it's gone. You're never going to see it again, kind of thing. And they do have magnets and filters, like screens and stuff, that try to get that stuff out, but it doesn't all get taken out. So, part of us is like asking, hey, you need to have a designated cell phone area that shouldn't be out, just like we would, on the floor in the brewery, saying, hey, don't be on your phone while you're CIPing a tank. Don't be on your phone while you're checking the conveyor of the dribble belts or something like that.
Wow. All right. That's a new one on me. Sticking with hops for just one more minute, as I start to get back to talking to you about being a brewer, is there, taking out of the equation for a moment, like the super popular hops of the moment, is there a hop varietal that exists that you as a brewer feel particularly drawn to? That you feel like if you get the right batch of it, you're just going to make a beer that sings?
Yeah, one of those is actually a more recent variety. I mean, there's a few I think about like that, but Cashmere is a newer variety that we've really fallen in love with, and I think partly it's this unique hop that has this really interesting citrus and berry aromas. I sometimes, and stone fruit too. It's kind of this really, rubbing the hop itself to me is more almost like strawberry like sometimes, but also like has this interesting kind of herbaceous spiciness. And then in the beer, sometimes you get the interesting peach and grapefruit notes too. And that variety, was came out of the USDA breeding program a few years ago, and for a couple of years it just kind of sat around. And we've noticed that with these public hop varieties, they don't have a marketing department. Basically, the USDA just releases them, for for use by the growers and says, okay, this is now, a released variety. Anyone can get, rootstock, and, they have the kind of process they go through to get that. But it's not like the flashier stuff like Citra, Mosaic, that, is coming out of the hop breeding company, which, has a marketing department and a lot of money behind it and does a lot of outreach. And also because the hop breeding company is a joint project between Yakima Chief and Haas, which are, two of the biggest companies that sell hops to brewers. They have all their salespeople going out basically and pushing these varieties. I mean, for lack of a better term, not that they need to push those varieties on anybody, but they're great hops, absolutely, and we use a lot of them. But they have certain advantages just because of how that works. But Cashmere, just kind of flew under the radar because it was just kind of quietly released by the USDA, and then as it was adopted by more farmers, they had to kind of figure out how to grow it, and there was varying quality, I think, over the first few years as people were figuring out when to pick it, when the optimum picking window was as far as maturation and the aromas you were getting. But after a couple of years of that, I think, we really fell in love the first time we used it. I remember the first pilot single hop beer we brewed here was absolutely amazing. I, at first smell, thought that it was like a grapefruit beer. Like I was like, I swear you put like grapefruit extract or something in this. And then, subsequently it became a little more complex. And we really love it. So I think just because we've been able to work with a couple farmers on, saying, hey, this is what we're looking for in this hop. And, we want to kind of be on this journey with you of figuring out how to grow this since it's a new hop. And hopefully as a larger user of this hop so far, we've been able to kind of steer it in a positive direction as far as the quality of the hop overall. So that's been a fun experience over the last few years.
All right, so getting back to you as a brewer, but also the company at large, where does Propagator fit in to the larger Firestone umbrella?
So we're always doing new stuff here, and we pretty much on average are doing like a new beer a week. And I think for a pilot facility for a larger brewery, that's not outrageous by any means. It seems that's pretty average, if maybe a little lower than average even. Yeah. But pretty much everything we make here is going to be sold in our tap room. So we have 3 tap rooms, and we can do 20 barrel batches here. We have a 10 hectoliter German brew house, Kasper Schultz, that somewhat replicates the process of the larger brew houses. The scale is so different that there's some things that are really hard to scale, and that's mostly on the fermentation side. But basically it's a German style brew house with a mash mixer and a separate lauter tun, and then we boil with an external calandria, so the influence that the boil has is very similar to the larger brew house style. It's not like we just got a direct fired single infusion system that is really common in breweries this size, which would have just made different beer than what we're used to doing. So partially we are, we're making enough beer to always keep some new interesting beers on in our tap rooms. And then, we're always looking over the next couple of years of new developments and new things that we want to be working on. So we just kind of start brewing beers in the styles that we're interested in exploring. Sometimes, as we get closer to wanting to launch a new beer, we're more specifically honing in on a recipe that's going to be the beer that we're going to release, and then brewing test batches here, getting those on tap kind of covertly, and people don't really know what we're up to, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now our new year-round beer we just launched was a beer that we had on tap here over the last year and no one realized it. So that's a lot of what we're doing, but also just having fun. We want to make interesting beers that we don't ever envision are going to be beers that might have larger market appeal, but some people appreciate, and we just like to do as brewers.
What's a good example of that?
Rauk beer.
Attaboy.
Yeah,
I was the right place. I know. Look at you pandering. I love it. Okay. Is that all right? Let's talk about Rauk beer then.
No, I mean I brewed one batch a couple of years ago, and I think it got a really good reception among the people that liked it. I think we did a pretty close, something in the style of like a Schlenkerl Märzen. But, we weren't able to sell through that whole batch. I think we ended up dumping a few kegs at the end.
There's no way in hell that you guys would ever do a Rauk that would have national distribution, right?
No, yeah, I think the closest, it certainly was national distribution, but we've done a couple batches of Imperial Walker's Reserve Smoke Porter aged in bourbon barrels. And so that's the biggest release we've done of a smoked beer, a couple releases of that.
All right. Well, what's a more realistic example of a beer that you all get jazzed about that, might not have larger commercial appeal, but that like tickles you as a brewer?
Yeah. Another one that we've consistently done here that it just never, we're never able to like take the next step on is our Schwartz beer. And, that's another one of those brewers beers where, we all love making dark lagers. And, we've been pumping out a couple batches of that a year pretty much since we opened. And we always kind of talk like, oh, maybe next year of the year, maybe we could put this in cans, do some distro, and, hasn't happened yet, but never say never. We still may see a dark lager at some point, maybe not specifically that beer, but maybe some other one.
Where's the hesitancy? Is it consumers? Is it, I feel like if you all put some juice behind it, maybe it could take off. Is there?
Yeah, I think
how much is it the tail wagging the dog versus, the right way?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for that. That, especially once you get to a certain size, if you're willing to put your energy into it, you can make some things happen. I think we've just been so focused on our other larger brands that something like that, putting in the work for something like that, we haven't quite figured out how to make it work, but it's something that we still talk about. And, I think we tend to move a little slower and, we're being very methodical about these things, I think on a larger scale. So, yeah, we're definitely not that brewery that's releasing a ton of seasonals on a distro footprint. We tend to be a little more measured in what we're doing. And, so when we do something like that, it has to be kind of well thought out, and it's going to take a while.
Is there an example of a beer that you guys had on tap at the Propagator that did become, the larger beer that you said you were sort of like stealthily pouring? Is there something that comes to mind that somebody listening to this as they're now walking the shelves can relate to?
Well, yeah, a couple, there was Welcome to LA, which we launched last year. And that was a beer that we had brewed as a draft only beer here since 2019 in kind of several iterations. And that's a hoppy lager, variously called a West Coast Pilsner or an IPL.
Cold IPA.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we kind of settled on just calling it kind of a West Coast lager, hoppy lager. And so we have that in SoCal Distro now, since, it's playing on the LA, name, and we're trying to make that kind of a local beer since it originated in the LA brewery here. So there's that, but, something like Hopnosis, which is our new year-round IPA that we just launched. That was something that we were trialing here last year. And I think the last name we used was like HOP number 3. And I think it was like Hop Ontology Project, which I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to get that, but it's something we got a kick out of on the R&D side. And that was an IPA using lager yeast. And so that's kind of like, as you can see, like with Welcome to LA, we were kind of moving in that direction as far as developing hoppier lagers. And we had brewed a few other hoppier lagers before that, where we're trying out, American hops in different forms, not just the classic IPL, which is, was at least in the past, mostly, take your West Coast IPA and just use lager yeast. We were kind of exploring where, a more kind of traditional lager sensibility and balance maybe intersects with American hop profile. And so that kind of led us, I think, to, Hopnosis is the kind of latest iteration of that. And where we kind of finally went with that was, bringing it all the way into an IPA and just saying, well, this beer is an IPA. We're just making it a little bit differently. And And, and most people that are going to buy it don't know and don't care, that the details behind it, but it's just, a new West Coast IPA really.
Is there regionality to beer drinking still? Like, are there pockets of local palate preferences that you see?
I think so. Yeah. When I travel around, I definitely notice differences in other areas, and I definitely, when I, listen to interviews on, various podcasts, and, including yours, some of the ones I was recently listening to with brewers in other areas of the country talking about what's hot in their market. I see things that, aren't really much of a thing here. And so it's interesting to see how that works, and, how beers have different appeals in different areas. Certainly, I mean, I, have been made aware that, that West Coast IPA is like becoming a trend in other areas now, maybe where it wasn't, the areas that, weren't strong IPA markets before hazy took over.
Yeah.
And then, moving to different areas. Yeah. You just kind of see, I mean, I was just in Florida in January for the hop convention. And, it's interesting to see the dichotomy there of like, heavily fruited kettle sour, and then like, giant ABV adjunct stout.
Yeah.
And it's like, and those,
which is so bizarre for Miami and that area in Tampa. It's just,
yeah.
Yeah.
And those exist here. But not, to the same extent, and then I see like, I think because California was very early in the craft game, there's this inertia in the market here. And, and so, we still have beers like DBA and Union Jack that like are still kicking after all these years. And they kind of represent, that's kind of old school. Like, you still see that from a lot of breweries here where it's like, okay, I have my kind of old school, like an amber pale ale, more traditional West Coast IPA that, isn't the super modern style. And those are like, that's still a thing. So I wonder, whenever I go to other areas that, didn't have, Sierra Nevada and Anchor and Lagunitas, in their market forever, or, Firestone to some extent, I guess we're getting up there in age too. It seems a little bit different.
I mean, 25 plus, right?
Yeah. Last year was 25. So going on 26 this year. And so I do think that there's more of a traditional, like you have the drinkers, you develop that culture, and some of those beers just don't ever go away. Like, I don't know, is like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale ever not going to be everywhere in California, and I just don't know, I don't know what it's like necessarily in other areas. I'm sure it's not as ubiquitous, but I know they still have really wide distro for that. But, and then stuff like Lagunitas IPA, obviously as well, or, Stone IPA, looking back at, all the breweries that just, they're able to, even if the market evolves around them, all those beers are still there and they still do pretty well here.
When you think about inertia, right, there are some breweries that have been around for a long time, 10 plus years, 15 plus years, whatever. And they have a formula that works. They have a footprint that they're happy with, and they can just sort of keep going. And then there are breweries that, have consistent, reliable performers, but the brewery is never satisfied and always tinkering, not necessarily looking to replace, but making sure that inertia doesn't fully set in. When you're thinking about future beers, when you're thinking about innovation in the beer space, how do you start that process? Is it just from traveling and getting a piece of an idea or tasting something and wondering what you can do with it? Is there something else that you do when you're thinking about the creation of a new recipe or what could potentially be a new style?
There's just so much inspiration all around, I think. And that's kind of been, where we've moved in the last few years, I think is just kind of looking at what people are into that we maybe don't do yet. And then saying, could I do that better? Can I make, the best version of that to somebody? And, is that something that I want to do? Because there's definitely, lines that we just haven't crossed yet as far as like new things out there, but things that, that we wouldn't, and I guess that sounds kind of pejorative in a way, but like, there's always, we're always looking at a lot of new things and new ideas out there. And, at our size, we definitely consider all the options out there. Anything that's hot, anything that's burning up the market, we're taking a look at, and we're saying, is this something that's viable for us to do? Should we get in on this? And so there's kind of that, like, that side of us that's keenly aware of the overall market and trends. But then there's also the side of just, what kind of classic things are we passionate about? And do we want to just make our spin of that? And, like grounding that kind of in more classic beer styles, or, just being inspired by new processes and techniques that brewers are coming up with to make beers that maybe are familiar in flavor profile, but you approach in a slightly different way. And I think we tend to do a lot of that because that's a little bit of our core competency as a brewery has been, just crafting those like perfect balanced beers that aren't like too out there, too crazy. We're definitely not known as like a very crazy brewery, but in some areas we do experiment more. I mean, especially when we get into barrels and stuff like that. We make some really interesting products, I think, especially coming out of our barrel program and our beer club lately. So we definitely have a dichotomy where it's like, you're looking at mass market stuff. You're saying, constantly having that conversation, what are we going to do with seltzer or non-alcoholic or different types of fruit things? And then, which sorts of different barrel age things are we going to come up with? We have our sour program, we're doing spontaneous beer, we're doing all of these cocktail inspired burn barrel age beers where we're starting to mix elements of clean and sour together. So we have all these parts always flying around. And we have a pretty big team too. So, there's always a lot going on. So it's hard to really say. It seems like we get a little bit of everything.
What's something that's either on the drawing board or in fermenters or barrels right now that you're excited to put in front of people?
Ooh, well, I guess thinking about, what's coming up right now, from the Propagator, nothing too crazy, but we just brewed our anniversary double IPA and we collaborated with El Segundo on it. And we just mixed a couple new elements in, a couple new hops that I'm really excited about. We're using Vista, which is the newest release from the USDA that, I know that a few brewers have been playing around with as it's been in development. It was 074 was the USDA number before it got released. So that's a really cool, and I think it's a really awesome hop. Another, very modern IPA profile, something, that wouldn't be out of place, in a lineup of beers with, something like Strata and Citra Mosaic, something like that. It's a very similar type of hop. And then there's a new hop from Hop Breeding Company, which is just number 1019, which they were super jazzed up about Harvest, or at Harvest last year. And it's really interesting, like peach ring tropical character. So we're throwing a couple of those in there. We're doing some fermentation hopping, but it's like a clean West Coast IPA. It's going to be pretty clear. It's not, going hazy. So I think we continue to kind of just try to progress the profile of IPAs and not be, put in a box and say, okay, here's what a hazy IPA is. Here's what a West Coast IPA is. There's this whole spectrum of flavors that you can play around with. And so, we're always looking to tweak that and kind of find the next thing there. I really, really excited to see what's gonna do, like how that's gonna work out for us, I guess, because you're trying a couple new things. And then I don't know, classically, we just got a couple lagers in the pipe. We did our first Maibach ever.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so I'm actually pretty excited about that. That was a collaboration with Moonlight Brewing, and
Sure.
yeah, and so we've got that coming out in a couple weeks. And then yeah, otherwise, I mean, just looking further out, or yeah, just looking further out. Just new stuff coming out, in the fruit realm. I think we got really invested in fruit beer last year, taking over the Cali Squeeze brand, and just working on new ideas there. And yeah, a lot of new fun experimentation that we've been doing on a really small batch, even smaller than Propagator. We have like a 1 barrel fermentation block that we do a lot of experimentation with up in Paso, actually. And so we've been trying out a lot of different fruits, different formulations of stuff up there. So we'll definitely have some new stuff coming out from that pretty soon.
Cool. And that's Slow Brewing, right? SLO.
Yeah, that was a brand that Slow Brew developed, and we just really dug everything, basically the branding, the beers, and have a great relationship with them. Their brewmaster used to work at Firestone. Adam and David are friends with the owner of Slow Brew, and basically, we're basically like, hey, would you consider selling this brand and these beers to us? We're kind of interested in getting into this realm, but you already made the brand that we want. And they were like, sure. So we took that over from them. The main one of that's a blood orange Hefeweizen.
Yeah, I've had it.
Seems like kind of a throwback, but it's actually doing pretty well for us so far. And I think, it's interesting how sometimes those trends can be cyclical, or it's like the world is ready to come back to that. It almost seems like a 90s beer, but
it does. Yeah. But the technology and the know-how has improved, I imagine, so that it's probably a little bit better than what we might have been tasting in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe. I hope so. I just want one quick clarification thing on the Maibach that you brewed with Moonlight. First for Propagator or first ever for Firestone Walker?
I don't know of anyone that we've done before that. So
it's amazing.
That's it.
I mean, 25 years of almost 26 of, okay.
Yeah. I was like, we're not really in the Bock game. Yeah. I was trying to think of stronger lagers that we had brewed, and I didn't have a single one going back all the way to batch 1 of the Propagator. And I don't know of us ever doing one at the big brewery. Yeah.
Okay. All right. On the show, I've been asking folks a relatively simple question with the premise of my wife and I were rewatching The Good Place last summer, and there's this whole thing in the last season of being able to walk through a green door, and you can be anywhere at any point in time with anybody that you want to be with. And so if such technology existed on this plane of existence, and you could walk through a green door as this conversation ended and be in any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world at any point with anybody, where would you go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you want to drink?
I'm tempted to say that I would like to go in the mid 60s to Fritz Maytag's favorite bar in San Francisco, where he was drinking Anchor Steam when he heard that they were going to go out of business. And because I want to know, and I want to drink it with him, and I want to know what he tasted in that beer that inspired him to get into brewing. And I think that moment, it was a very important moment for beer in the US. And so, yeah, I want to know what that beer tasted like. That, or I guess, maybe pre-earthquake San Francisco, back when steam beer was ubiquitous, and, maybe take him back all the way back then with me, so we could see what it was like actually in the heyday, and not that one last surviving example that, was limping on its last leg, that somehow he still thought there was something there. Even though admittedly I've heard that, at that point they were struggling and the beer wasn't that great and it was pretty inconsistent, but whatever it was, I want to know. I'd like to drink that beer with him. We know the beer that he went on to create, after they cleaned up the brewery and modernized it and everything like that. And that's what Anchor Steam is now. But I'd be fascinated to know what that beer tasted like before he got his hands on it that made him want to do it.
I love that answer. I would, if you would have me, I'd love to sit there with you and see the same thing. That's a cool piece of history. Sam, thanks for being on the show this week, and thanks for sharing your insights. And I feel like you gave me a little bit of hope about of what the future of hops could be in beer, that there's still some life kicking in the West Coast, and maybe it can be pushed out here to the East.
Oh, I'm sure it will. I have a lot of hope for hops. So yeah, it's definitely something, that we're deeply invested in. And I don't think that's ever not going to be, one of our main areas of passion and exploration.
What's a hop that you've seen popping up in beers that you're excited about and digging the flavors and aromas? Let me know about it. You can email me. It's John Hall, JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can get with me on Twitter @John_Hall. A reminder to check out beeredge.com for our This Week in Rauk Beer and Defend Pilsner merch, and to follow along on social media @The Beer Edge. And of course, This Week in Rauk Beer is also online. The Facebook group is easy to search, and on Twitter and Instagram, it's @TW Rauk Beer. We're able to bring you this show each week thanks to the companies that want to support independent journalism in the beer space. If you'd like to learn more about our surprisingly affordable rates, please reach out to sponsor @beeredge.com. As promised, Jack Henler is back with us. Jack's Abbey is a sponsor of this episode, and I hope you'll give them a closer look. We're talking about the Lagers of the World series and Destination Iceland, which is now available. Jack, you're 5 into this series, and these collaborations have really focused on tradition. Over the last year or so, what have you been learning about lagers and regionality as this project has continued on?
It's been a great experience talking with lager brewers from across the world. While each lager brewer is using very similar techniques and styles to create their beers, they're all really incorporating unique aspects from where they are located, ingredients that are grown near them, or inspirations that may be unique to their region. So it's really interesting to see how one style has evolved into many different interpretations, and we've really learned a lot through this process.
What can you tell us about Destination Iceland?
This is a really cool partnership because we're learning about a country that, while they pull a lot of inspiration from Europe, really had to create their own interpretations, being slightly isolated historically. And while this Bock beer is very reminiscent of maybe a German style Bock beer, there are some really unique characteristics, particularly how they're utilizing water from their country, this Icelandic water, and understanding how that affects the finished beer was really interesting.
Awesome. Well, Destination Iceland is available now. Thank you, Jack. And a reminder to everybody listening to go and check out jacksabbey.com to learn more about this beer, as well as all of the other lagers that the brewery has on offer. And again, thanks to the brewery for being a sponsor. A reminder to check out the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for the show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back to drink beer and to think beer.